Hi, welcome back to the What Kind of Internet Do You Want show. My name is Devon James. I'm the co-executive director of the Web3 Working Group. Today, we're going to be talking about this AI-generated image and the ridiculous impact it's had on the world. So a few days ago, this image started going around the internet. It was shared by an anonymous account, and then a handful of other accounts picked it up and retweeted it. It claimed to be of an explosion at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And this really freaked some people out. We saw stocks dip pretty quickly, a fall of 30 points from the S&P 500, which is $500 billion. Quite a significant reaction. Of course, it recovered as soon as it was confirmed fake by both the fire department in Arlington saying, no, there is no actual fire here, and also just people looking at the image and recognizing, for one thing, that's not the Pentagon. That's a rectangular building. Secondly, there's a handful of aberrations within like the fence and the lamppost itself. To some degree, it kind of looks like the lamppost is behind the fence, and in other ways, it's in front of the fence. So basically just a mistake that AI made as it was creating it. But this led to some people pretty much freaking out. Obviously, here we have AI is becoming dangerous. A lot of people echoed this. A lot of people started calling for it to be heavily regulated or even banned in the United States. So we've gone from, in the past few months, AI is responsible for all those really cool looking pictures that you're seeing going around, or the Star Wars by Wes Anderson trailer, to, oh my God, this can move markets, not to mention any kind of other influence that it could have if it's allowed to just run rampant on the internet. So what do we do about this? Well, some people have pointed to that there are now tools out there, like this one's called AI or Not, that's essentially trained on exactly how these engines create images, and so they kind of understand what they'd be looking for coming out of one of these engines and be able to identify with a high degree of certainty, yes, this was in fact made by an AI. This wasn't. But when I saw this, I honestly questioned, what makes people think that this is AI? It could absolutely have been made by a compositor. I was a visual effects artist and compositor for a number of years. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, I could have made this in 10 minutes. Obviously, the extra layer that AI adds is it probably made it in 2 seconds. So you could generate a great deal of these kind of things. My point is, this isn't a new potential. It isn't a new concept that faked images look real. Just look at Hollywood films. So there's a lot of people that are trained to do this. So how does this introduce a brand new threat? Obviously, it isn't a brand new threat. It's just a faster threat, and it's a threat more people can employ. Rather than spending years learning how to do something, you can type in a prompt and you get something back out, right? So what that kind of leads me to is that, yes, a tool like this can help because it can identify the stuff that's made by AI. Well, these specific for AIs, but one that it's not trained about, it would miss, and it could obviously miss some that are actually created by AI, and then also a Photoshop artist themselves can create something and it might miss that. So I think it's important for us to recognize that there's not going to be some singular, authoritative source that can always tell us whether something is or is not an AI-generated image. I think we have to think about it differently, and in doing so, we have to consider kind of what's being floated. The idea of completely banning it, the idea of heavily regulating it, perhaps to the degree or in such a way where we say the public isn't allowed to use this. But these few companies, because we trust them to, deliver reports and follow certain rules, we'll let them do it because obviously we can't stop this technology entirely. Now, some people actually think we could stop the technology entirely. That's a little bit absurd. Just like any emergent technology, like electricity, fire itself, these are things that have inherent dangers built into them. And it might lead some people to say, oh my God, let's ban it. But the reality is you're going to fail to do so in the first place. And thank goodness for that, because inevitably what's going to be understood is that there's a great deal more benefit that can come from these things, especially if it's allowed to come fully to fruition by allowing everyone to have access to it. But sometimes, like is happening right now for AI, when a new technology comes along, there are certain entrenched powers that consider it very scary, perhaps for corrupt, illicit reasons because their particular industry is being threatened, but also perhaps and quite often for totally earnest reasons. Because they're focused so much on their fears, it basically puts blinders on them to the potential benefit around them. This has always happened. There's a fantastic example, actually, of in the mid 1800s in the UK. They were basically leading the way on the development of the internal combustion engine. So, as I would assume probably happened, some people were injured by automobiles, perhaps even killed, and the government freaked out. And it basically just said, it's not so important to us that this is developed. We have a perfectly good system as it is. We've got horses and buggies, and they get people around just fine, and this is way too dangerous of a technology. So we're going to regulate it dramatically. What were passed were called the red flag laws, and there was a whole bunch of different things involved, but one of them was, for example, if you're driving a car through a city, you need to have someone walk out ahead, 60 yards ahead, waving a red flag. You need to slow down to 2 miles an hour, and there was even more absurd possibilities that were offered, like if you're going to pass a horse on the road, you need to park the vehicle behind a bush and disassemble the vehicle before the horse gets there so it doesn't get scared. People thought that this was actually reasonable at the time. The domestic industry working to, or not even industry really, but the nascent industry within the UK was completely destroyed. And 30 years later, in Germany, the automobile was invented. So England lost the ability to claim having invented such, and it's entirely possible that those 3 decades gave Germany such a dramatic advantage that to this day, it has one of the largest GDPs in all of Europe, to some degree because of that automobile industry and the fact that they were way out ahead of everyone else. So in retrospect, we can look at these things and say, sure, there were dangers involved, but this is an emergent technology that is going to take off. Even if you were to heavily regulate it or ban it in one particular country, other countries are going to see it differently, and they're going to enable it to keep on being developed, and you're going to fall behind. Great little example here, basically kind of analogizing this concept of banning AI to, let's just go ahead and stick with the first version of the internet because it worked perfectly well while the rest of the world continues to advance. And in fact, we have some amount of evidence that we are in fact falling behind other countries in the world when it comes to AI research. Here's an article that essentially says that a few years ago we were way in front. We slowed down. China sped up. Now it looks like China might be producing more papers, better quality research than we are. This could be very dangerous for us, especially to the people that consider this to be an actual threat. If it is a threat, and we choose to ban it from our country, then only other countries have access to that threat. Is that a wise decision? Now, the Web3 industry, likewise, is to some degree threatened by the potential of being banned in the US, not necessarily banned as much as so heavily regulated as to allow the rest of the world to absorb the majority of development. I actually look at this and realize that this is a good opportunity for the two technologies to work together. If, in fact, we do not so overly regulate the Web3 industry out of the US, we can use the technology that Web3 gives us to help deal with this potential threat that AI might mean to what people believe on the internet, that is exposed by this image. Because as it is right now, nothing on the internet is signed by its creator. We don't know when it was put out in the first place. We don't know who put it out. One of the greatest benefits to blockchain technology is every single thing added to a blockchain is signed by whoever owns the keys that put it out into the blockchain. So if this is a Bitcoin transaction, it's basically the same thing as you writing the signature on the bottom of a check. In order for that check to be valid, you need to sign it. When it comes to, say, data storage blockchains like Arweave, for example, again, you have the same thing. Whoever's creating that transaction that's putting that piece of data into this blockchain signs it. That's a required piece. A few years ago, Amy actually talked about this in one of it actually looks like our very first episode of What Kind of Internet Do You Want?
Well, we would have two key pieces of information that we don't have in the current system. The publisher would be cryptographically identifiable, as we just talked about, and when the content was published to the blockchain would be timestamped.
Okay. So what she was basically talking about is this premise of sign everything. Because things that are on blockchain are signed cryptographically, they can be traced back to who signed them. That doesn't mean it isn't anonymous. It is, in fact, some degree of anonymous. It's pseudonymous. But some publisher can be identified, even if it's the only thing that they've ever published. Or it might be one of 100 things that they've published. One of the ways that content creators and news organizations and public figures and anyone that wants to say something publicly can ensure that their audience can correctly associate some statement attributed to them with them is by signing that statement. And they can sign it in such a way that the keys are connected from one piece of content to the next piece of content to the next article to the next tweet, what have you. This basically allows us to solve for the is it real or not dilemma from kind of the opposite point of view that something like AI or not is taking. AI or not is basically trying to say, I will tell you whenever something is fake, based upon what it knows about how fakes work. What we're proposing instead is the idea that everything that someone wants to be attributed as real, they sign. And if something is found to not have a signature or to have a signature that has no history behind it, where it's the very first time this particular set of public keys is being used, it's very easy to recognize that as fake or not authoritative, essentially. And the only way that that can happen is if Web3 technology is allowed to exist within the United States and we get to a point where everyone has wallets, everyone has the ability to hold their own private keys and sign the statements that they make. But there's an extra layer to that some people are always going to want to get some sort of attestation put on something. They don't want to necessarily trust just their own eyes because they know some people are really, really good at this stuff, and the AIs are eventually going to get really, really good at this stuff. So they do want to know, what do other people think about this? Well, we can use what I'm talking about these public keys to just basically put attestations on top of things, where an authority figure like AI or not comes along and looks at it and says, we believe this is fake. We don't want to just depend on one or two of those, though, and so one of the other reasons we want to make sure that we don't so heavily regulate the Web3 industry is by allowing it to run open source, decentralized, and on end users' computers. Specific utility, like video processing, can be run on those networks, and we can have multiple competing approaches for how you identify things. Some of them I'm looking at for the indicators of something that is AI versus others that are looking for indicators of authenticity, and each offering their own attestations saying, we think this is fake. Another one saying, well, we kind of think it's real for these reasons. Point is, the only way we're going to actually put a handle on this and not let it just be this thing that drives us to a point where we can't trust literally anything online anymore is if we embrace these new emergent technologies, both AI and Web3, and recognize that there is a great deal of benefit behind technology that scares us early on if we only allow it to actually reach its full potential. Because in every one of these cases, there's always the potential for harm, and some part of the population will choose to use it that way, but far more of the population prefers not to do harm to other people. So if we are willing to trust the world to do so, I guarantee we won't regret it.